Sarah Mitchell stood in the checkout line at the local grocery store, her 8-year-old son Danny clutching her hand tightly. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She had just finished her weekly shopping trip, the cart filled with essentials for their small household. Sarah worked 2 jobs to make ends meet since her husband's deployment, and every dollar counted. Danny looked up at his mother with bright eyes, chattering excitedly about his upcoming school project. He was supposed to write about heroes, and he had already decided to write about his father, who was serving overseas. Sarah smiled down at him, her heart both swelling with pride and aching with loneliness. It had been 6 months since they had seen his father, and communication was limited due to the sensitive nature of his military assignment. As they moved forward in the line, Sarah noticed 3 men entering the store behind them. They were dressed casually but moved with an aggressive swagger that immediately put her on edge. The tallest one, with multiple tattoos covering his arms, seemed to be scanning the store with predatory eyes. His companions flanked him, clearly following his lead. The cashier, a young woman named Jennifer, was doing her best to handle the busy afternoon rush. Sarah had seen her here many times before and always appreciated her friendly demeanor. Jennifer was working alone at the front, with only one register open despite the growing line of customers. The store manager was nowhere to be seen, having stepped into the back office for what seemed like an extended phone call. When Sarah reached the counter, she began placing her items on the conveyor belt while Danny helped by handing her the lighter items. Jennifer greeted them warmly, asking about Danny's upcoming school year and commenting on how much he had grown since their last visit. It was this kind of personal touch that made Sarah prefer this smaller, family-owned grocery store over the large chain stores across town. As Jennifer began scanning the items, Sarah realized she had forgotten to grab milk. She asked Jennifer if she could quickly run back to get it, leaving Danny at the counter with their cart. Jennifer assured her it would be fine, and Sarah hurried toward the dairy section at the back of the store. The 3 men had been watching this interaction carefully. As soon as Sarah disappeared around the corner, they approached the counter. The leader, whose name was Marcus, had been released from prison just 2 months earlier after serving time for armed robbery. His companions, Tony and Rick, were longtime associates who had been planning this particular score for weeks. Marcus had observed the store's patterns and knew that afternoons were the most vulnerable time. The skeleton staff, the single register operation, and the manager's habit of lengthy phone calls created the perfect opportunity. He had also noticed that this store served a predominantly working-class neighborhood where people often carried cash for their weekly shopping. Jennifer immediately sensed trouble as the 3 men surrounded her register. Marcus leaned over the counter, his voice low and threatening as he demanded she open the cash drawer. Tony positioned himself to block the view from the front windows while Rick kept watch toward the back of the store where Sarah had gone. Danny, standing beside the shopping cart, watched in growing terror as the situation unfolded before his young eyes. He had been taught about stranger danger and dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His small hands gripped the handle of the shopping cart as he tried to process what was happening to the kind cashier who had always been so nice to him and his mother. Jennifer's hands shook as she tried to explain that she couldn't open the register without a purchase or a manager's key. Marcus grew increasingly agitated, his voice rising as he threatened her. The store's security camera system was outdated, with several blind spots that Marcus had carefully noted during his previous visits. Meanwhile, Sarah was in the dairy section, unaware of the drama unfolding at the front of the store. The milk cooler was located in a corner that completely blocked her view of the registers. She was taking her time, comparing prices and checking expiration dates, grateful for this brief moment of normalcy in what had been a particularly stressful week. Back at the register, Marcus was losing patience. He reached across the counter and grabbed Jennifer's wrist, twisting it painfully as he repeated his demand. Jennifer cried out in pain and fear, her voice echoing through the relatively empty store. Danny took a step back, his eyes wide with terror, but he remained frozen in place. Marcus then made a decision that would change everything. Frustrated by Jennifer's inability to open the register and paranoid about how long they had been standing there, he decided to make an example. Without warning, he struck Jennifer across the face with the back of his hand, the sound echoing sharply through the store. Danny watched in horror as the kind cashier stumbled backward, her hand flying to her reddening cheek. Tears began streaming down the boy's face, but he found himself unable to move or call out. The violence he was witnessing was beyond his 8-year-old comprehension, yet he instinctively knew this was very wrong. Jennifer, shaken and hurt, finally managed to hit the register's emergency button, but the silent alarm would take several minutes to bring any response. Marcus, now completely committed to the robbery, vaulted over the counter with surprising agility for his size. His companions moved to more aggressive positions, with Tony now blocking the store's front entrance entirely. Sarah, still in the dairy section, heard what sounded like a sharp noise but couldn't identify its source. She grabbed a gallon of milk and began making her way back toward the front of the store, completely unaware that her son was witnessing a violent crime just a few aisles away. Marcus forced Jennifer to move away from the register as he began trying to force it open himself. His experience with similar machines from his previous criminal activities served him well, but the older model was proving more resistant than he had anticipated. His frustration grew with each passing second, and he began making increasingly violent threats. Danny, still standing beside their shopping cart, finally found his voice. In a small, terrified whisper, he called out for his mother. But Sarah was too far away to hear him, and the men were too focused on their criminal activity to pay attention to the frightened child who was witnessing their crime. The store felt eerily quiet except for the sound of Marcus struggling with the register and Jennifer's quiet sobbing as she held her injured face. The normal afternoon sounds of shopping and casual conversation had been replaced by an atmosphere of fear and violence that seemed to press down on everyone present. Rick, who was supposed to be watching for Sarah's return, had become distracted by Marcus's struggles with the register. He moved closer to help, leaving his post unwatched. This critical error would soon prove to be their undoing, but, for now, they remained unaware of the mistake. Sarah rounded the corner from the dairy section, milk in hand and a smile on her face as she prepared to rejoin her son at the checkout. She was thinking about dinner plans and whether Danny had finished his homework when she first caught sight of the scene at the register. Her maternal instincts kicked in immediately. Even from a distance, she could see that something was terribly wrong. Her son was standing rigid with fear, there were strange men at the register, and Jennifer appeared to be in distress. Sarah's first thought was for Danny's safety, and she began moving quickly but quietly toward the front of the store. As she got closer, the full scope of the situation became clear. She could see Marcus behind the counter, forcing the register open while Jennifer cowered nearby, clearly injured. Tony and Rick were positioned like sentries, and her 8-year-old son was trapped in the middle of what was obviously a violent robbery. Every muscle in Sarah's body tensed as she assessed the situation. Her mind raced through possible actions, but she was acutely aware that any sudden movement might escalate the violence and put Danny in even greater danger. She needed to find a way to protect her son and help Jennifer without making the situation worse. The three criminals continued their work, unaware that they were being observed by someone who had been trained to handle exactly this type of situation. Sarah's military background, which she rarely discussed and which none of the store's regular customers knew about, was about to become very relevant. Sarah Mitchell was not just another suburban mother doing her weekly shopping. Hidden beneath her civilian clothes and quiet demeanor was a highly trained Navy SEAL who had completed multiple combat deployments before taking a temporary assignment that allowed her to be home while her husband served overseas. The irony was not lost on her that these criminals had chosen to target the one store on the one day when their victim's mother happened to be one of the most highly trained special operations soldiers in the United States military. But they would learn this fact soon enough. For now, Sarah focused on getting into position. She set the milk down quietly and began moving with the silent, purposeful steps that had been drilled into her through years of specialized training. Danny needed her, Jennifer needed her, and these criminals were about to discover that they had made a very serious mistake. Marcus finally managed to force the register open, but the contents were disappointing. The store's policy of making regular deposits meant that only a few $100s remained in the drawer. His anger at the small take, combined with his growing paranoia about how long they had been inside, made him increasingly volatile. He turned back toward Jennifer, raising his hand to strike her again for what he perceived as deliberate deception about the money. Danny watched in terror, certain that the nice cashier was about to be hurt even worse. He closed his eyes tightly, unable to watch what he was sure would happen next. But Jennifer was not struck again. Instead, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. Every person in that store, criminal and innocent alike, would remember those next few words for the rest of their lives. Step away from the counter and put your hands where I can see them. The voice was steady, controlled, and carried an unmistakable tone of authority that immediately commanded attention. Marcus froze with his hands still raised, while Tony and Rick spun around to locate the source of the command. What they saw was a woman in casual clothes standing about 15 feet away, but something in her posture and bearing made it clear this was no ordinary civilian. Sarah had positioned herself strategically, using the store's layout to her advantage. She stood at an angle that gave her clear sight lines to all three criminals while keeping Danny behind her and out of the immediate line of fire. Her stance was relaxed but ready, the kind of deceptive calm that comes only from extensive combat training. Marcus lowered his hand slowly, his street instincts telling him that this woman represented a threat he hadn't anticipated. His eyes darted between Sarah and his companions, trying to assess this new element in what had been a straightforward robbery. The tone of her voice suggested law enforcement or military training, but her appearance didn't match either profile. "Lady, you need to mind your own business and get out of here," Marcus said, trying to regain control of the situation. His voice carried forced bravado, but there was an underlying uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. "This doesn't concern you." Sarah's response was immediate and unwavering. "It became my concern the moment you put your hands on that young woman. It became my concern the moment you traumatized my son. Now step away from the counter." Danny, hearing his mother's voice, opened his eyes and turned around. The relief on his face was immediate and overwhelming. His mother was here, and somehow, just by speaking, she had made the scary men stop what they were doing. He didn't understand exactly what was happening, but he knew with absolute certainty that everything was going to be okay now. Rick, the largest of the three criminals, decided to test this unexpected opposition. He had served time for assault and battery and wasn't accustomed to backing down from anyone, especially not a woman who appeared to be alone and outnumbered. He began moving towards Sarah with the swagger of someone who had intimidated many people before. "You picked the wrong day to play hero, lady," Rick sneered as he approached. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you. Do the math." Sarah remained perfectly still until Rick was within arm's reach. Then, with movements so fast they seemed almost impossible to follow, she demonstrated exactly why his mathematics were flawed. In less than 3 seconds, Rick found himself face down on the linoleum floor with his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made any movement extremely painful. The speed and efficiency of the takedown shocked everyone present. Tony reached for something in his jacket pocket, but Sarah's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't recommend that. Keep your hands visible and step away from your friend." Marcus, still behind the counter, began to realize that they had encountered something far beyond their experience. The woman's movements had been professional, precise, and utterly confident. This wasn't luck or desperation, this was training at a level that suggested military or law enforcement expertise. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity mixing with growing concern in his voice. "Someone who's had a very long week and doesn't have the patience for this kind of nonsense," Sarah replied. She maintained her position over Rick while keeping visual contact with the other two. "Jennifer, are you hurt badly?" Jennifer, still shaken but beginning to recover her composure, touched her face gingerly. "I don't think anything's broken, but my cheek really hurts." "Danny, honey, I need you to go stand by Jennifer behind the counter, okay? Stay close to her." Danny immediately followed his mother's instructions, his faith in her absolute. As he moved toward Jennifer, the cashier put a protective arm around him, both of them finding comfort in each other's presence during this surreal situation. Tony, who had been frozen in place since watching his large friend get effortlessly neutralized, finally found his voice. "Look, we can work this out. Nobody needs to get hurt here. We'll just take what we came for and leave." Sarah's laugh was short and without humor. "You already hurt someone. That changes the entire equation. The only question now is how this ends for the three of you. Marcus, his criminal mind working through possibilities, made a desperate calculation. The woman was clearly skilled, but she was also protecting civilians. He thought he could use that against her. Maybe we can't take you in a fair fight, but your kid's right there. You sure you want to risk his safety over some cash that isn't even yours? The temperature in the store seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Marcus had just made the kind of mistake that revealed exactly how little he understood about the person he was threatening. "Let me explain something to you," Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge that made even Rick, still pinned to the floor, stop struggling. "My son is perfectly safe because I'm here. You, on the other hand, just threatened a child. That moves this situation into an entirely different category." What none of the criminals knew was that Sarah Mitchell was not just any Navy SEAL. She was part of an elite unit that specialized in hostage rescue and close-quarters combat. She had completed tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, participating in operations that had saved dozens of civilian lives. The skills she had learned in those environments were now being applied in a grocery store in suburban America. Marcus, realizing that his threat had backfired spectacularly, tried a different approach. Okay. Let's everyone just calm down. We'll leave right now, and nobody else gets hurt." "You're not leaving," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "The police are already on their way. The store has a silent alarm system that was triggered when you assaulted Jennifer. Your options now are to surrender peacefully or to find out exactly what happens when you threaten the child of someone with my particular skill set." The mention of police sirens in the distance confirmed Sarah's statement. Tony and Marcus exchanged glances, both beginning to realize that their simple robbery had turned into a nightmare scenario. Rick, still on the floor, had stopped trying to move entirely, recognizing that any attempt to escape his current position would result in considerable pain. Jennifer, emboldened by Sarah's presence and the approaching sirens, spoke up for the first time since the confrontation began. They were planning to rob the store. "The big one hit me when I couldn't open the register fast enough." "I saw that," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off the criminals. "Which is why none of them are leaving until the police arrive." Marcus made one last desperate attempt to regain control. He reached into his pocket, but before he could withdraw whatever he was reaching for, Sarah had released Rick and moved across the space between them with incredible speed. Marcus found himself slammed against the wall behind the counter, his arm twisted behind his back in a hold that was both painful and completely inescapable. "Tony, you have about 30 seconds to decide whether you want to surrender peacefully or join your friends in discovering that I really don't have any patience left," Sarah called out without turning around. Tony, who had watched both of his companions neutralized with embarrassing ease, raised his hands in surrender. The sound of sirens was growing louder, and he had seen enough to know that resistance was futile. Danny watched his mother with a mixture of awe and confusion. He had never seen her move like that, had never heard her speak with such authority. She was still his mother, but she was also something else entirely, something powerful and protective that he had never witnessed before. "Mommy," Danny called out softly, "are you a superhero?" Despite the tension of the situation, Sarah smiled at her son's question. "No, sweetheart. I'm just your mom. But I'm also a soldier, and soldiers protect people who can't protect themselves." The police arrived just as Sarah finished securing Marcus. 3 patrol cars pulled up outside the store, their red and blue lights casting colorful patterns across the windows. The officers who entered found a scene unlike anything they had encountered before: 3 would-be robbers subdued and waiting for arrest, an uninjured cashier, a safe child, and a calm woman in civilian clothes who had apparently single-handedly prevented what could have been a tragic situation. Officer Rodriguez, the first to enter the store, surveyed the scene with professional eyes. He had responded to dozens of robbery calls over his 15-year career, but he had never arrived to find the perpetrators already subdued by a civilian. His initial assumption was that he was looking at an off-duty police officer or security guard. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah gave a clear, concise account of the events, her military training evident in her organized presentation of the facts. She described the criminal's actions, their assault on Jennifer, and the threat made against her son. Throughout her statement, she remained professional and factual, avoiding any unnecessary drama or embellishment. "And you are?" Officer Rodriguez asked, clearly impressed by her handling of the situation. "Sarah Mitchell. I live about 10 minutes from here. This is my son Danny, and we were just doing our weekly grocery shopping when these men decided to rob the store." Officer Rodriguez looked at the three subdued criminals, noting the professional manner in which they had been restrained. "Ma'am, do you have law enforcement or military training? Because what you did here isn't something most civilians could manage." "I serve in the Navy," Sarah replied simply. She saw no reason to elaborate on her specific role or training unless directly asked. Her focus remained on ensuring that Danny was okay and that Jennifer received any medical attention she might need. The paramedics arrived shortly after the police and immediately began checking Jennifer for injuries. The blow to her face had left bruising and swelling, but there appeared to be no serious damage. They also examined Danny for signs of trauma, but, aside from being shaken by what he had witnessed, he appeared to be physically unharmed. Marcus, Tony, and Rick were loaded into separate patrol cars, each facing charges of attempted robbery, assault, and threatening a minor. As Marcus was being placed in the back seat of one patrol car, he looked back at Sarah with something approaching respect mixed with resentment. "You never told us you were military," he said. "You never asked," Sarah replied. "You also never asked if threatening my son was a good idea. Next time you plan a robbery, you might want to do a better job of reconnaissance." Officer Rodriguez completed his preliminary report, taking detailed statements from Sarah, Jennifer, and even Danny, who provided a surprisingly clear account of what he had witnessed. The store's security cameras, despite their limited coverage, had captured enough footage to corroborate the statements and provide additional evidence for the prosecution. As the scene began to wind down, other customers who had been deterred by the police presence began to gather outside, curious about what had transpired. Word was already spreading through the small community that something significant had happened at their local grocery store. Jennifer, her face still swollen but her composure largely restored, approached Sarah as the police finished their work. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been here." She trailed off, not wanting to complete the thought in front of Danny. "You don't need to thank me," Sarah replied. "This is what we do. We protect people." Danny, who had been quietly processing everything he had seen, finally spoke up again. "Mommy, why didn't you tell me you were so strong?" Sarah knelt down to her son's eye level, her expression softening from the professional demeanor she had maintained throughout the crisis. "There are lots of things about Mommy's work that I don't talk about, sweetheart. But, when people are in danger, especially people we care about, sometimes we have to use skills that we hope we'll never need." The store manager finally emerged from the back office, having been alerted to the situation by one of the police officers. His face was pale with shock as he surveyed the scene and realized how close his store had come to a violent robbery and how much worse it could have been. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, approaching Sarah with obvious gratitude, "I can't begin to express how thankful I am for what you did today. Jennifer is like family to all of us here, and, knowing that you kept her and your son safe, there aren't words." As the police cars pulled away with their prisoners and the paramedics finished their work, the store began to return to something approaching normal. Other customers, initially held back by the police activity, began to cautiously enter, drawn by curiosity about what had happened. Sarah completed her grocery shopping, with Danny helping as he always did, but now with a new understanding of who his mother really was. The ordinary afternoon had been transformed into something extraordinary, revealing depths to his parent that he had never imagined existed. As they walked to their car with their groceries, Danny looked up at his mother with new eyes. "Will you teach me to be strong like you?" Sarah smiled, her heart full despite the stress of the afternoon. "I'll teach you to be brave and to protect people who need help. But I hope you never have to use those skills the way I did today." The drive home was quiet, both mother and son processing the events in their own ways. For Sarah, it had been an unwelcome reminder of skills she had hoped to leave unused during this peaceful period at home. For Danny, it had been a revelation about his mother that would shape his understanding of strength, courage, and protection for years to come. As they pulled into their driveway, Danny had one more question. "Are you going to tell Daddy what happened?" Sarah considered this carefully. "Yes, I think I will. He should know that his family can take care of itself while he's away, but he should also know that we're safe and that we handled a difficult situation together." That evening, as Sarah helped Danny with his homework and prepared dinner, the events of the afternoon felt almost surreal. But the local news was already covering the story, describing it as an attempted robbery that was thwarted by an alert civilian. The reporters didn't yet know the full story, but they would learn it soon enough. The quiet suburban mother who had stopped 3 armed criminals with her bare hands was about to become a local hero, whether she wanted that attention or not. But, for now, in the safety of their home, Sarah was simply grateful that everyone had gone home safe that night. The story broke on the local news that evening, though the initial reports contained only basic details about an attempted robbery that had been stopped by a civilian. Sarah watched the coverage with Danny, both of them still processing the afternoon's events. The reporter described the incident in general terms, mentioning that 3 suspects had been arrested and that no one had been seriously injured. "That's us, isn't it, Mommy?" Danny asked, pointing at the television as the reporter stood outside the familiar grocery store. "Yes, sweetheart, that's what happened today," Sarah replied, muting the television. "But I want you to remember something important. What happened today was unusual. Most people never have to deal with situations like this, and I hope you never do either." Danny nodded solemnly, but Sarah could see that he was still working through his understanding of what he had witnessed. The image of his mother officially subduing 3 adult men would likely stay with him for a long time, changing his perception of both his mother's capabilities and his own safety in the world. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Sarah's phone began ringing early, starting with calls from other military spouses in the area who had heard the news. Word traveled quickly through the close-knit community of families dealing with deployments, and everyone wanted to know if the rumors they were hearing were true. By mid-morning, the calls had expanded beyond their immediate circle. Local news outlets had obtained more details about the incident and were requesting interviews. The story had evolved from a simple robbery attempt to something more compelling: a Navy SEAL mother protecting her child and a civilian employee from armed criminals. Sarah declined most interview requests, preferring to maintain the privacy that her military service often required. However, the store manager had spoken to reporters, praising her actions and providing enough details to paint a clear picture of what had transpired. The story was gaining momentum whether she participated or not. Danny went to school that day with a new sense of pride mixed with confusion about his mother's sudden local fame. His teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had heard the news and approached him gently to ask if he was okay after witnessing such a frightening event. Danny assured her that he was fine because his mother had been there to protect everyone. During lunch, Danny found himself surrounded by classmates who had heard various versions of the story from their parents. Some of the details had become exaggerated through retelling, but the core facts remained accurate. His mother had stopped bad guys from hurting people at the grocery store. "Is your mom really a superhero?" asked Tommy, one of Danny's close friends. "She's a soldier," Danny replied with newfound understanding. "Soldiers protect people, even when they're not at work." Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with unexpected attention from multiple sources. The local police department had called to commend her actions and to request that she consider speaking at a community safety seminar. The grocery store's corporate office had reached out to express their gratitude and to offer her family free groceries for a year, which she politely declined. Most significantly, her commanding officer had called to check on her welfare and to discuss the incident. While Sarah had acted as a civilian and off-duty, her actions reflected on the Navy and had potentially exposed her identity in ways that could complicate her current assignment. "Mitchell, I've read the police report," Commander Harrison said during their conversation. "You handled the situation exactly as I would expect from someone with your training. But we need to discuss the operational implications of your exposure." Sarah understood the concern. Her current assignment was designed to keep her stateside while her husband deployed, but it required maintaining a low profile in the civilian community. Having her special operations background become public knowledge could complicate both her current duties and her family's security. I understand, sir. I had limited options given the threat to civilian lives and my son's presence at the scene. I made the best decision I could with the information available. I'm not questioning your judgment, Mitchell. I'm questioning our next steps. The story is spreading beyond local media. We may need to consider reassignment options if your cover becomes too compromised. This possibility worried Sarah more than the confrontation with the criminals had. She had specifically requested her current assignment to provide stability for Danny while his father was deployed. Having to relocate or change assignments could disrupt the careful balance they had worked to maintain. By the afternoon, the story had indeed spread beyond local outlets. Military blogs and social media accounts dedicated to service member stories had picked up the narrative. The combination of a female Navy SEAL, a mother protecting her child, and the efficient neutralization of multiple armed criminals created a story that resonated with audiences far beyond their small community. Jennifer, the grocery store cashier, had also become part of the story's appeal. Her interview with local television portrayed her as a hard-working young woman who had been victimized by criminals but protected by an unlikely guardian angel. The human interest angle was compelling, and news outlets began framing the story as an example of everyday heroes stepping up in crisis situations. When Danny returned home from school, he was full of questions about the attention his family was receiving. Children his age struggled to understand concepts like media coverage and public attention, but he was clearly aware that something significant had changed. "Why do so many people want to talk to you, Mommy?" Sarah sat down with Danny to have a conversation she had hoped wouldn't be necessary for several more years. She explained that sometimes when people do things that help others, other people want to hear about it. She also explained that their family valued privacy and that they wouldn't be talking to reporters or appearing on television shows. "But what you did was good, right? You helped Jennifer and stopped the bad guys." "Yes, sweetheart, what I did was necessary and right. But doing the right thing doesn't mean we need everyone to know about it. Sometimes the best heroes are the ones who help people quietly and, then, go back to their normal lives." That evening, Sarah received a call that changed her perspective on the growing attention. Jennifer called to thank her again, but also to share that the grocery store had started a small scholarship fund in honor of what had happened. The fund would help young people in the community pursue education or training in fields related to public safety and service. "I wanted to do something positive with what happened," Jennifer explained. "Something that would help other people and honor what you did for me. The store is matching the first $1,000, and we've already had people from the community wanting to contribute." This development touched Sarah in ways that the media attention had not. The idea that something positive and lasting could come from that frightening afternoon appealed to her sense of service and community responsibility. Over the weekend, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She agreed to participate in one interview with the local newspaper, with specific conditions about what would and would not be discussed. Her goal was to shift the focus from her personal story to the broader themes of community safety and supporting each other in difficult situations. The interview, conducted in her home while Danny played in the backyard, allowed Sarah to present her perspective on the events while maintaining appropriate boundaries about her military service. She emphasized that her actions were simply those of a mother protecting her child and a citizen helping a fellow community member in distress. "I hope people understand that this situation was unusual," Sarah told the reporter. "Most of us will never face anything like this. But we can all look out for each other in smaller ways every day. We can be aware of our surroundings, support our local businesses, and be ready to help when help is needed." The resulting article struck exactly the tone Sarah had hoped for. Rather than sensationalizing her military background or the violence of the confrontation, it focused on community resilience and the importance of citizens supporting each other. The scholarship fund was prominently mentioned, and Jennifer was quoted extensively about her recovery and gratitude. Danny read the article with his mother, sounding out words he didn't recognize and asking questions about the more complex concepts. Seeing their story presented in this way helped him understand the broader meaning of what had happened and why so many people were interested in it. "Are you famous now?" he asked after finishing the article. "I don't think so, and I hope not," Sarah replied honestly. "But I think maybe we helped people remember that we should all look out for each other. That's more important than being famous." The three criminals faced serious charges as a result of their attempted robbery. Marcus, as the leader and the one who had assaulted Jennifer, faced the most severe potential sentence. Tony and Rick, while also charged with serious crimes, had cooperated with authorities and provided information about other planned criminal activities. The prosecutor handling the case called Sarah to discuss her potential testimony at trial. Given the clear evidence and the criminal's admission of guilt, it was likely that plea agreements would be reached without requiring a trial. Nevertheless, Sarah was prepared to testify if necessary to ensure that justice was served. "The defendant's attorneys are very interested in avoiding a trial where you would testify," the prosecutor explained. "Your professional background and the manner in which you subdued their clients would make for compelling testimony. They're much more likely to accept reasonable plea agreements knowing what a jury would hear." This legal development meant that Sarah would probably not have to relive the incident in a courtroom setting, which was a relief for both her and Danny. The plea agreements would ensure that the criminals faced appropriate consequences while allowing her family to move forward with their lives. 2 weeks after the incident, Sarah received an unexpected letter from her deployed husband. While they had spoken by phone about what had happened, the letter provided his more considered thoughts about the situation and his pride in how she had handled it. "Reading about what you did," he wrote, "reminded me why I fell in love with you in the first place. Not because you're a warrior, though you certainly are, but because you're someone who steps up when stepping up is needed. Danny is lucky to have you as a mother, and I'm lucky to have you as a wife." The letter also contained a message for Danny, praising the boy's bravery and calm behavior during a scary situation. His father's words meant everything to Danny, who had been worried that he hadn't been brave enough during the confrontation. As the weeks passed, the media attention gradually faded, replaced by other stories and concerns. The grocery store returned to normal operations, though Jennifer reported that she felt safer knowing that there were people like Sarah in their community. The scholarship fund continued to grow, eventually reaching enough money to provide meaningful assistance to several young people. Sarah's commanding officer decided that her cover had not been compromised enough to require reassignment, particularly since she had handled the media attention professionally and had not revealed any sensitive information about her duties or training. She would be able to continue her current assignment and maintain the stability that was so important for Danny. The incident did result in some changes to Sarah's routine and awareness. She began paying more attention to her surroundings during everyday activities, not out of paranoia but out of professional responsibility. She also started having age-appropriate conversations with Danny about safety, awareness, and when to seek help from trusted adults. Danny's school project about heroes, which had originally been planned as a tribute to his deployed father, evolved into something more complex. With his teacher's guidance, he wrote about different kinds of heroes: soldiers who serve far from home, parents who protect their families, and ordinary people who help others in times of need. "My dad is a hero because he helps keep our country safe," Danny wrote in his project. "My mom is a hero because she keeps our family safe. Jennifer at the grocery store is a hero because she does her job even when it's scary. Heroes are everywhere if you know how to look for them." The project earned Danny an A+ and was selected for display during the school's academic showcase. Sarah attended the showcase with mixed emotions, proud of her son's insight but still adjusting to their family's brief moment in the public spotlight. 6 months later, Sarah received notification that Jennifer had been accepted into a criminal justice program at a local college, with her tuition partially covered by the scholarship fund that had been established after the incident. The young woman had decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, inspired in part by how efficiently Sarah had handled the dangerous situation. "I want to be able to help people the way you helped me," Jennifer wrote in a thank you note. "I know I probably won't be as tough as you are, but maybe I can make a difference for someone else who needs help." This news pleased Sarah more than any media coverage or official recognition could have. The idea that her actions had inspired someone to pursue a career in service represented the best possible outcome from a difficult situation. Danny, now several months older and more mature, had processed the incident in his own way. He was no longer frightened by the memory, and he spoke of his mother's actions with pride rather than confusion. The experience had taught him that strength comes in many forms and that protection is something people provide for each other. On the anniversary of the incident, Sarah and Danny returned to the grocery store for their weekly shopping. Jennifer, now balancing work with her college classes, was working at the register. The three of them exchanged smiles and brief conversation, but the encounter felt normal and unremarkable. As they left the store, Danny asked his mother if she missed the excitement of that day. "No, sweetheart, I don't miss it at all," Sarah replied honestly. "I'm grateful that I was able to help when help was needed, but I much prefer quiet days when nothing scary happens." "But you would do it again if you had to, right?" Sarah smiled at her son's question, recognizing the importance of her answer for his understanding of duty and service. "Yes, Danny. If someone needed help and I was able to provide it, I would do it again. That's what we do for each other." As they drove home, Sarah reflected on how an ordinary afternoon had revealed extraordinary circumstances and changed several lives in small but meaningful ways. Her training as a Navy SEAL had prepared her for many situations, but being a mother had given her the most important motivation of all, protecting the people who mattered most. The incident had reminded their entire community that heroes aren't always people in uniforms or with special titles. Sometimes they're the person standing next to you in line at the grocery store, ready to step up when courage is needed most. In Sarah's case, she happened to be both a highly trained special operations soldier and a suburban mother buying milk for her family. The combination of those identities had created a perfect storm of protection, training, and motivation that had turned a potential tragedy into a story of community resilience and individual courage. Most importantly, it had shown Danny that strength comes not from seeking conflict, but from being prepared to meet it when it finds you.